Crouse.
I wanted to start off by asking, your father passed away in 1985, and why wait until now to write a book about his life and your relationship to him?
Well, first of all, Richard, the book has been almost 9 years in the making. I spent at least 6 years writing this book. It was one of the most challenging things I've ever done as a writer. And then from the time that my publisher accepted the manuscript until it was published last November, that was another 2.5 years. So it isn't as though I suddenly just came out with it yesterday,
Right.
But I think this is a book that required a great deal of maturity on my part and a certain objectivity about my life and my subject and my relationship with my father. I just honestly don't think I could have written as good a book if I had tried when I was younger.
Right. Was it cathartic for you in some way to put down your thoughts and your feelings and maybe express them in a public way for the first time?
Well, it was. I think that I had made my peace with my relationship with my father, obviously, before I wrote the book. I think I had to do that before I could write this book. But certainly the writing of the book was like the last step towards really reaching closure and feeling that I had resolved my relationship with my father as much as I can.
Well, the book is filled with incredible stories, and there's just a few I'd like to ask you about. I found it really interesting that through your mother's second marriage, that the daughter of Orson Welles would end up going to William Randolph Hearst's castle for
I know,
holidays.
Isn't that funny? I mean, really. And of course, as a child, fortunately, I didn't realize what an ironic situation I was in. But that is you're right, that is a strange coincidence. And I think that's why Mr. Hearst, as I always called him, he was very formal with me. I don't think he really knew whether to like me or hate me, because I was the stepdaughter of Charlie Lederer, who he was very fond of, who was Marion Davies' nephew. And then at the same time, I was the daughter of the man whose movie he had tried to destroy. So I was very much in an awkward position.
Well, do you think it was a coincidence that you were given a room with a huge painting of the Massacre of the Innocents hanging above the bed?
Do you think maybe that was his revenge?
Yes.
It's quite possible. I just know that it certainly terrified me as a child. But the main thing I was aware of as a child is that I was being kept out of sight, being kept far away. And I think it was because my mother and Charlie and Marion all decided that it was better that he didn't see me around too much,
Might upset him or
it
set him
might
off.
upset him. So I was spirited away. And as a child, since I didn't know why this was happening, it was very bewildering.
Well, did you keep journals or, the book is fairly detailed. And as I was reading it, I was thinking back to my life, and I was like, I don't remember. I don't know that I could write stories about when I was 10 years old with any kind of clarity. How was it?
The funny thing is, I've really been a writer all my life, and even as a young person, I kept diaries and journals, and I wrote voluminous letters to people who were kind enough to save them and return them to me at later times in my life. So I had all this as a kind of archive, plus my own memory. I've been blessed with a good memory myself. And that helped me a lot, writing the book. Reading old letters, reading old journal entries. And then the other thing is that every moment that I spent with my father was, for me, so important that I think we tend to remember the things in our lives that really matter to us.
Right.
And so I just remembered every conversation I ever had with him, every moment I spent with him. Even though I may have forgotten other things, I always remembered that.
Well, I really found a lot of the book is written in dialogue. And I really found in the chapters in which your father's voice appears and he's speaking to you, it's written in dialogue, and I really felt that I could hear it. I could hear his voice. I'm so familiar with his voice from obviously having studied the movies and everything else. And this voice it resonated with me. While I was reading the book, I could imagine hearing those words coming out of his voice.
That's wonderful. Well, of course, that's what I hoped I would achieve. I wanted to bring all these people to life. I mean, just about everybody in the book is dead now. Mm-hmm. And I felt that dialogue is a way to make it immediate for the reader. And so I did that deliberately, to give it a sort of narrative flow and to make you feel as though you were there, sitting at the next table, eavesdropping on our conversation.
Right, like we're, at the Brown Derby.
That's right.
Somewhere, listening over into the next room, or into the next table. Well, it's a fascinating portrait of him because it is at once quite personal, obviously, because you're his daughter. But on the other hand, you give us little details, things that I wouldn't have known. Where he says at one point in the book that he spent most of his professional life trying to raise money.
I know, isn't that sad?
Well, I think he's Orson Welles. People should be throwing money at him.
I know they should be.
And in fact, it was just the opposite much of his career.
Yes, I know.
And I was interested to read about those kind of details. Is there kind of a melancholy for you when you look back at sharing those sort of details, or how did you feel?
Of course, I wish that he had gotten more financial support, especially in his own country. But at the same time, I think I do recognize the ironies of his situation. He was making art movies, and who knows? I've often thought maybe if he had been born in Italy or Sweden or in some country that had a greater appreciation of art films, he might have gotten far more support. But in America, there isn't really a great tradition of art movies. It's really very hard to think of one.
Yeah,
it wasn't made by Orson Welles, Right. So I think, unfortunately, he just didn't have the popular support that he would have needed to get the funding that he needed to realize his creative visions. But I think it's extraordinary that he accomplished as much as he did. Mm-hmm. I really do.
Richard Crouse.